The emergency beacon pierced through the cosmic void like a dying scream. Admiral Zethkar of the Galactic Council watched the holographic display with growing dread as the red warning signals cascaded across his command center. The Vrex swarm had broken through the outer defensive perimeter of the Andorian system, home to 12 billion souls across 4 inhabited worlds. Status report, Zethkar commanded, his scaled hands gripping the command rail until his knuckles went white. Sir, the swarm has deployed over 3 million biomechanical ships. Our estimates show complete system overrun within 72 hours, reported his tactical officer, a young Eltarian whose normally blue skin had turned pale with fear. The Admiral's mandibles clicked nervously. In his 3 centuries of military service, he had never encountered anything like the Vrex. They consumed everything in their path, converting organic matter into more ships, more weapons, more death. Entire star systems had gone dark within days of first contact. Send the emergency call to all Council member species immediately. Maximum priority transmission, Zethkar ordered. Within hours, the responses began flooding in. The crystalline hegemony regretfully declined, citing ongoing territorial disputes in their home sectors. The Aquatic Federation expressed deep sympathy but explained their water-based ships were incompatible with the void combat environment. The Silicon Collective ran probability calculations and determined the mission success rate was below their minimum threshold of 67%. One by one, every major galactic power found reasons to avoid the fight. Some cited technical limitations, others mentioned prior commitments, and a few simply stated that the Andorian system was outside their sphere of influence. The Admiral watched each rejection with growing despair, knowing that 12 billion lives hung in the balance. Sir, we have one more response coming in, announced the communications officer, a nervous tremor in her voice. Zethkar looked up hopefully. Who? The humans, sir. From the Sol system. The Admiral's expression darkened. He had heard stories about the humans, whispered tales from the outer rim worlds. They were a young species, barely 2 centuries into spaceflight, and their territory consisted of less than 30 systems. Most galactic citizens considered them primitive, aggressive, and unstable. The Council had granted them provisional membership status more out of curiosity than respect. What do they say? Zethkar asked, though he expected another polite refusal. The communications officer swallowed hard before reading the response. Message begins, we have reviewed your emergency transmission regarding the Vrex threat to the Andorian system. The Terran Alliance will respond with our available fleet assets. Estimated arrival time is 18 hours. Admiral Sarah Chen, commanding. Message ends. Silence filled the command center. No conditions, no negotiations, no requests for additional information or support. Just a simple acknowledgement and a commitment to help. Sir, I'm reading their fleet composition now, the tactical officer reported, his voice uncertain. They're sending everything they have. 47 ships total, including their entire heavy battle fleet. Zethkar felt his heart sink. 47 ships against 3 million Vrex vessels. It would be a massacre. These humans were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and he wasn't sure which possibility worried him more. Display their fleet specifications, he commanded. The holographic projector showed the approaching human vessels. They were smaller than most Council ships, built with angular designs that prioritized function over aesthetics. Their weapons were primitive kinetic cannons and missile systems, their armor was basic metallic plating, and their power cores were simple fusion reactors. By galactic standards, they were museum pieces. Sir, incoming priority message from Admiral Chen, the communications officer announced. The main screen flickered to life, revealing a middle-aged human female with short gray hair and intense brown eyes. Her uniform was practical and unadorned, bearing only essential rank insignia. Behind her, Zethkar could see the bustling activity of a ship's bridge, with human crew members moving with purposeful efficiency. Admiral Zethkar, I'm Sarah Chen of the Terran Dreadnought Indomitable. We'll be entering the Andorian system in 17 hours. I need complete tactical data on Vrex ship types, weapon systems, and deployment patterns. Also, provide coordinates for refugee evacuation zones and civilian shelter locations. Zethkar found himself impressed by her directness, even as he struggled with the futility of their situation. Admiral Chen, I appreciate your willingness to assist, but you must understand the scope of this threat. The Vrex have overwhelmed systems with much larger defensive fleets than yours. Chen's expression didn't change. Admiral, my species has a saying, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good beings to do nothing. We may not have the biggest fleet or the most advanced technology, but we have something else. And what is that? Sethkar asked. We're really angry about what the Vreks are doing to innocent people. And angry humans tend to accomplish impossible things. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Sethkar stared at the blank screen, processing what he had just witnessed. The human admiral hadn't asked about odds, casualties, or strategic advantages. She had simply accepted the mission and begun planning for success. Over the next 16 hours, the admiral watched with growing fascination as the human fleet approached. Their ships moved in tight formation, maintaining perfect spacing and coordination despite their varied sizes and classes. Long-range sensors showed constant communication between vessels, with data streams flowing between ships at impressive rates. Sir, the humans are requesting permission to establish a forward command post on our flagship, reported the communications officer. Granted, Sethkar replied without hesitation. He was curious to observe these strange beings up close. An hour later, Admiral Chen materialized on his bridge via transport beam, accompanied by 2 other humans. One was a tall male with dark skin and multiple scars across his face, introduced as Colonel Marcus Webb, Marine Force Commander. The other was a shorter female with auburn hair and quick, intelligent eyes, identified as Dr. Elena Vasquez, Fleet Science Officer. Chen approached the tactical display without ceremony and began studying the Vreks positions. 12 billion civilians. 4 inhabited worlds. 3 million hostiles incoming. She turned to her companions. Marcus, what's our evacuation capacity? If we strip everything non-essential from our ships, we might manage 200,000 people. Maybe 300 if we really pack them in, Webb replied grimly. Not nearly enough, Vasquez added. We need to thin their numbers significantly before we even attempt evacuation operations. Sethkar watched the exchange with growing concern. These humans were discussing tactics as if victory was possible, despite being outnumbered 60,000 to 1. Either they possessed hidden weapons beyond imagination, or they were delusional. Admiral Chen, he interrupted gently, perhaps we should focus on evacuating key personnel and cultural artifacts. With such overwhelming odds, a strategic withdrawal might be the most logical course. The 3 humans exchanged glances, and Sethkar caught something in their expressions that made his scales prickle with unease. It wasn't fear or resignation, but something far more dangerous. Admiral, Chen replied slowly, I don't think you understand how humans operate. We didn't come here to evacuate people. We came here to win. Webb stepped forward, his scarred face grim. The Vreks think they can roll over innocent civilians and consume entire worlds without consequences. They're about to learn why messing with helpless people makes humans extremely unfriendly. Dr. Vasquez was already working at the tactical display, running calculations at superhuman speed. The swarm formation is actually quite predictable. They rely on overwhelming numbers and biological adaptation rather than strategic thinking. That gives us several potential advantages. Advantages? Sethkar asked incredulously. Against 3 million ships? Quality over quantity, Chen replied simply. Every one of our ships is crewed by people who volunteered to be here, knowing the odds. Every weapon system is maintained by someone who takes personal pride in their work. Every tactical decision is made by individuals who refuse to accept defeat. The Admiral felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of military service, a spark of hope. These humans radiated confidence not because they were ignorant of the danger, but because they had already decided that failure was not an option. What do you need from us? He heard himself asking. Chen smiled for the first time since arriving. Everything you've got, Admiral. Ships, weapons, personnel, tactical data, and, most importantly, absolute commitment to see this through. We're going to save every last civilian in this system, and then, we're going to make the Vreks regret they ever heard of humanity. As the human fleet took up defensive positions around the 4th planet, Sethkar realized that his understanding of warfare was about to be fundamentally challenged. These weren't just soldiers or tacticians, they were something far more dangerous, protectors who had chosen to stand between helpless civilians and certain death. The Vreks swarm continued its inexorable approach, their biomechanical ships spreading across space like a cosmic plague. But, for the first time since the crisis began, Admiral Zethkar allowed himself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, the impossible might be within reach. The humans had answered the call when no one else would. Now it remained to be seen what fury unleashed in defense of innocence could accomplish against overwhelming darkness. Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the main tactical display aboard the Indomitable, watching as the Vrex swarm approached the outer edge of the Andorian system. The alien vessels moved like a living organism, individual ships flowing and reforming into new patterns while maintaining their overall advance. Each biomechanical construct pulsed with organic lighting, creating an eerie spectacle against the starfield. Distance to contact, 4 hours, 17 minutes, reported Lieutenant Commander Jake Harrison from the navigation station. Swarm is maintaining current speed and formation. Chen nodded grimly. 4 hours to prepare for a battle that would determine the fate of 12 billion lives. Around her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, their movements precise and purposeful. These were men and women who had volunteered for this mission knowing they might never return home. Dr. Vasquez, what did you learn from the Council's tactical archives? Chen asked. The science officer looked up from her portable workstation, her expression troubled. The Vrex don't just destroy worlds, Admiral. They consume them. Each ship in their swarm contains millions of microscopic organisms that break down organic matter at the molecular level. When they finish with a planet, nothing remains but bare rock and processed minerals. Any weaknesses? Colonel Webb inquired from his position near the weapons console. Potentially. The swarm operates as a collective organism, with each ship linked to others through bioelectric fields. Disrupt those connections, and individual vessels become significantly less effective. The problem is generating enough electromagnetic interference to affect millions of ships simultaneously. Shen studied the display showing their 47 vessels arranged in defensive formation around the fourth planet. Each ship represented hundreds of crew members, advanced technology, and years of training. Against any conventional enemy, it would be a formidable force. Against the Vrex, it seemed laughably inadequate. Admiral, incoming transmission from Captain Rodriguez on the Aurora, Harrison announced. The face of a weathered Hispanic man appeared on the secondary screen. Captain Miguel Rodriguez commanded one of their heavy cruisers and had served alongside Chen for over 15 years. His expression was calm, but she could see the determination in his dark eyes. Sarah, my engineering team has been working on something. Remember the gravitational pulse generators we developed for asteroid mining operations? Shen leaned forward with interest. The ones that can create localized spatial distortions? What about them? Dr. Martinez thinks we can modify them to generate massive electromagnetic pulses. If we coordinate the timing across all our ships, we might be able to disrupt their bioelectric communications on a system-wide scale. Dr. Vasquez's head snapped up from her calculations. That could work, but the power requirements would be enormous. You'd have to channel everything through your main reactors simultaneously. Which means no shields, no weapons, and no life support during the pulse generation, Webb added grimly. Rodriguez nodded. Exactly. We'd be completely vulnerable for approximately 90 seconds while the generators charge and fire. But, if it works, it might give us the opening we need. Shen considered the proposal. It was an incredible risk that would leave their entire fleet defenseless at a critical moment. If the timing was wrong, or if the electromagnetic pulse failed to achieve the desired effect, they would be destroyed before they could bring their weapons back online. How long do you need to implement the modifications? She asked. 3 hours, assuming we strip components from non-essential systems across the fleet. Do it, Chen decided. And, Miguel? Make sure your people know what this means. We get one chance, and failure isn't an option. As Rodriguez signed off, Chen turned to address her bridge crew. You heard the plan. We're going to hit them with everything we have, but we'll need perfect coordination across 47 ships. I want firing solutions prepared for the moment our weapons come back online, and I want evacuation shuttles prepped for immediate launch. Over the next 3 hours, the human fleet transformed itself into a massive weapons system. Engineers ripped apart non-critical equipment to provide power routing for the gravitational pulse generators. Weapons specialists prepared targeting solutions for thousands of priority targets. Medical teams established emergency treatment centers in cargo holds converted for refugee evacuation. Meanwhile, Admiral Zethkar and his council forces took up supporting positions, their more advanced shields and weapons providing cover for the human modifications. The alien admiral watched the frenetic activity with growing amazement. These humans worked with an intensity he had never witnessed, driven by something beyond mere duty or orders. "Admiral," Dr. Vasquez reported, "I've been analyzing the Vrex approach patterns, and I've noticed something interesting. Their formation is designed to maximize psychological impact rather than tactical efficiency. They want their enemies to see the overwhelming numbers and surrender without fighting." "That's their first mistake," Chen replied coldly. "Humans don't surrender when innocent lives are at stake." The Vrex swarm entered the outer system like a plague of mechanical locusts. Individual ships ranged from small fighter-sized craft to massive bioships larger than human dreadnoughts. They moved in complex patterns, weaving around each other while maintaining their collective advance toward the inhabited worlds. "Contact in 30 minutes, Harrison announced. Swarm is beginning to deploy into attack formation." Chen activated the fleet-wide communication system. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. In half an hour, we're going to do something that has never been attempted in galactic history. We're going to save 12 billion people from certain destruction using nothing but determination, ingenuity, and controlled fury." She paused, looking around her bridge at the faces of her crew. They were young and old, male and female, representing dozens of Earth's nations and colonies. But they shared a common expression: absolute resolve. The creatures approaching this system think they can consume innocent civilizations without consequence. They believe that overwhelming force makes them invincible. Today, we're going to prove them wrong. Today, we show the galaxy what happens when you threaten people under human protection. Across the fleet, similar speeches were being delivered by captains to their crews. In engineering sections, weapons bays, and medical stations, men and women prepared themselves for what might be their final battle. But there was no despair in their preparations, only cold determination to make their sacrifices count. "Admiral, the Vrex are hailing us," Harrison reported with surprise. "Put them on screen." The main display flickered to reveal a nightmare vision. The Vrex communication node was a twisted amalgamation of organic tissue and mechanical components. Pulsing veins carried data streams between neural clusters, while mechanical sensors focused on the human fleet with predatory interest. "Small fleet of meat creatures," the thing spoke with a voice like grinding metal and dying tissue. "You approach our feeding ground. Surrender your vessels and organic components for processing. Resistance will only increase the pain of consumption." Chen stepped forward, her expression ice-cold. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Alliance. You are ordered to cease your attack on the Andorian system and withdraw immediately. This is your only warning." A sound that might have been laughter emanated from the Vrex communication node. "Warning? Tiny meat creatures give warnings to the swarm? Your entire fleet contains insufficient biomass to feed a single hunting pack. We will process your vessels first, so you may observe the consumption of the worlds you failed to protect." "Counteroffer," Chen replied with deadly calm. "Turn around and leave now, or we're going to introduce you to the concept of human anger. Trust me, you won't enjoy the experience." The transmission ended with what sounded like mechanical screeching. Chen turned back to her crew, noting their expressions of grim satisfaction. The Vrex had just made this personal. "Contact in 15 minutes, Harrison announced. All ships report ready for pulse generation." Chen opened a private channel to Colonel Webb, who was coordinating Marine boarding parties. "Marcus, are your people ready?" "Locked and loaded, Admiral. If we get close enough to any of those bioships, my Marines will show them why boarding a human vessel is a bad idea." "Dr. Vasquez, final status on the electromagnetic pulse?" "All ships are synchronized and ready. Power levels are building toward maximum." "Admiral, there's something you should know about the modifications. The energy release will be visible across several star systems. If this works, everyone in this part of the galaxy will know exactly what human determination looks like." Chen smiled grimly. "Good. Let them know what happens when someone answers the call for help." The Vrex swarm spread across space like a living shadow, blocking out stars and filling the void with the glow of millions of biomechanical entities. Their formation was so vast that it took several minutes for the entire armada to become visible on human sensors. "My God," whispered a young ensign at the tactical station.
There are so many of them.
Numbers don't matter, Chen replied firmly. What matters is why we're here.
Those creatures want to murder 12 billion innocent people. We're the only thing standing in their way. That makes us the most important 47 ships in the galaxy right now.
As the first Vrex vessels entered weapons range, Chen felt the familiar calm that came before battle. Around her, the bridge crew prepared for an engagement that would be remembered for generations, assuming anyone survived to tell the story.
But survival wasn't the primary objective.
Success was all that mattered, regardless of the cost.
All ships, prepare for pulse generation on my mark, Chen announced to the fleet. Remember, people are counting on us. Failure is not an option. The Vrex swarm continued its approach, confident in its overwhelming superiority.
They had no idea they were about to discover why angry humans were the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. The moment arrived with devastating precision.
Admiral Chen's voice cut through the tension aboard every human vessel simultaneously. All ships, execute electromagnetic pulse in 3, 2, 1, mark.
Across 47 ships, fusion reactors pushed beyond safety limits as gravitational pulse generators channeled impossible amounts of energy into a single, coordinated burst. The space around the human fleet erupted in a blinding flash of electromagnetic radiation that painted the void in brilliant white light.
The effect on the Vrex swarm was immediate and catastrophic. Bioelectric connections that had linked millions of ships for millennia simply ceased to exist.
Individual vessels that had operated as a collective organism suddenly found themselves isolated, confused, and vulnerable. The perfect coordination that had made them unstoppable began to collapse as ships drifted out of formation, their organic navigation systems scrambled by the massive interference.
Pulse successful. Dr. Vasquez shouted over the alarms filling the bridge. Vrex bioelectric network is completely disrupted across a radius of 15 million kilometers. Admiral Chen felt a moment of fierce satisfaction before focusing on the next phase. All ships, weapons online, now. Target the largest bioships first. We have approximately 6 minutes before they adapt to the interference. The human fleet erupted into action. Weapon systems that had been offline during the pulse generation came back online with lightning speed.
Missile launchers cycled through their loading sequences while energy cannons charged to full power. Every ship in the fleet opened fire simultaneously, concentrating their assault on the massive command bioships that served as coordination nodes for smaller vessels.
The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Vrex ships that had seemed invincible when operating as a collective revealed critical weaknesses when isolated.
Their organic armor, designed to adapt and regenerate under normal circumstances, couldn't cope with sustained kinetic bombardment. Human railgun projectiles punched through biomechanical hulls like paper, while nuclear-tipped missiles created expanding spheres of destruction that consumed dozens of smaller craft.
Direct hit on primary command bioship. Lieutenant Commander Harrison reported with excitement. The entire central formation is breaking apart. Chen watched the tactical display with growing amazement. The Vrex swarm that had appeared unstoppable minutes earlier was now fragmenting into chaos.
Individual ships attempted to regroup, but, without their bioelectric coordination network, they moved like blind creatures groping in darkness. "Admiral, incoming priority transmission from Captain Rodriguez," Harrison announced.
"Put him through."
Rodriguez's face appeared on the secondary screen, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and fierce joy.
"Sarah, you need to see this. The electromagnetic pulse didn't just disrupt their communications. It triggered some kind of biological cascade failure in their organic components. The main display switched to external cameras from the Aurora, showing the aftermath of their coordinated strike.
Vrex bioships were literally coming apart at the cellular level, their organic components breaking down as the electromagnetic interference continued to wreak havoc on their biological systems.
"Dr. Vasquez, analysis," Chen demanded.
The science officer looked up from her readings with wonder in her eyes.
"The Vrex aren't just machines with organic components, Admiral.
They're living creatures that have been mechanically augmented. The electromagnetic pulse disrupted their neural pathways so completely that their bodies are rejecting the mechanical implants."
"How long do we have before they recover?" Colonel Webb asked. "They won't recover," Vasquez replied with certainty. "The biological cascade is self-sustaining.
Every ship affected by the pulse is going to break down completely within the next hour."
Chen stared at the display showing the disintegration of the Vrex swarm.
3 million ships were dying simultaneously, their biomechanical forms literally dissolving into component particles. It was the most complete military victory in recorded galactic history, achieved by 47 human vessels against overwhelming odds. But the celebration would have to wait. All ships, begin evacuation operations immediately, Chen commanded. We have 12 billion people to get to safety, and there may be other Vrex formations en route to this system. The human fleet split into specialized task forces with practiced efficiency. Heavy cruisers and dreadnoughts maintained defensive perimeters while smaller vessels moved toward the inhabited worlds. Cargo holds that had been stripped of equipment were rapidly converted into refugee compartments, with life support systems pushed to their absolute limits. Admiral Zethkar's voice came over the communication system, filled with awe and gratitude.
Admiral Chen, the Council fleet is prepared to assist with evacuation operations. Your people have accomplished something that will be remembered throughout galactic history.
Thank you, Admiral, but we're not finished yet, Chen replied.
Dr. Vasquez, I want detailed analysis of Vrex ship remains.
If there are more swarms out there, we need to understand their weaknesses.
Over the next several hours, the human fleet orchestrated the largest civilian evacuation in galactic history.
Ships designed to carry hundreds of personnel packed in thousands of refugees, with crew members giving up their own quarters to make room for families. Emergency life support systems were pushed far beyond their design specifications, but human engineers found ways to make the impossible work. Captain Lisa Park of the destroyer Valiant reported typical numbers. Admiral, we've loaded 8,000 civilians into spaces designed for 300 crew members. My engineers say we can maintain life support for 72 hours before we need to find more permanent housing.
Similar reports came in from across the fleet.
The frigate Determined carried 12,000 refugees in converted cargo bays. The battleship Resolute had packed 15,000 civilians into every available space, including the weapons magazines and engine compartments. But, perhaps most impressive were the civilian volunteer efforts.
Dr.
Elena Martinez, the fleet's chief medical officer, coordinated treatment for thousands of injured refugees while training civilian doctors to use human medical equipment.
Lieutenant Commander David Kim organized food distribution networks that turned military rations into adequate meals for entire families.
Engineering Chief Rachel Thompson taught refugee mechanics how to maintain life support systems using improvised tools and spare parts. Admiral, Colonel Webb reported from the surface of the second planet, we've established temporary shelters for approximately 2 million civilians who couldn't be evacuated immediately. My Marines are working with local security forces to maintain order and distribute supplies. Chen nodded, but her attention was focused on Dr. Vasquez's analysis of the Vrex remains. The science officer had been working non-stop to understand the enemy they had just defeated.
Admiral, I've completed preliminary analysis of the Vrex bioships, Vasquez reported. What we're dealing with is far worse than we initially thought.
These aren't just raiders or conquerors.
There's something else entirely. Explain.
The organic components show signs of forced evolutionary acceleration. These creatures were artificially enhanced over thousands of years to become perfect biological weapons. But the most disturbing part is that they retain fragments of their original consciousness. They know what they've become, and they can't stop themselves.
The implications hit Chen like a physical blow.
The Vrex weren't just monsters, they were victims who had been transformed into instruments of destruction. Somewhere in the depths of their biomechanical forms, traces of their original selves remain trapped and aware. Are there more of them? She asked quietly.
Definitely. Long-range sensors detected at least 12 other swarm signatures in nearby sectors.
Admiral, if we hadn't stopped them here, the entire galactic arm would have been consumed within a year. Chen looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. They had just saved 12 billion lives and discovered a threat that could end all organic life in the galaxy. The weight of that responsibility was staggering, but she could see in their expressions that they were ready to bear it. All ships, prepare for extended operations, she announced to the fleet. We have refugees to relocate, a system to secure, and a galaxy to protect. This was just the beginning. Over the following days, the human fleet worked tirelessly to establish permanent refugee settlements on the outer planets of the Andorian system. Council relief ships began arriving with supplies and temporary housing, but the humans remained as the primary security force.
Admiral Zethkar visited the Indomitable personally to express his gratitude and amazement. Admiral Chen, What your people accomplished here defies every military doctrine in the galactic archives. How did you know that electromagnetic pulse would be effective? Chen smiled grimly. We didn't know, Admiral. We just refused to accept that 12 billion people were going to die on our watch. Humans have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. When failure isn't an option, you find ways to succeed. But, the risk, Zethkar protested. You could have been completely destroyed. Yes, we could have been, Chen agreed. But, those people couldn't save themselves. Someone had to stand between them and certain death. That's what humans do when innocent lives are threatened. As reports spread throughout the galaxy of humanity's impossible victory, something fundamental shifted in galactic politics. Species that had dismissed humans as primitive newcomers began reassessing their assumptions. The Council voted unanimously to grant humanity full membership status and requested their assistance in developing defense strategies against future Vrex incursions. But, for Admiral Chen and her crew, the real victory wasn't political recognition or strategic advantage. It was the knowledge that when evil threatened innocence, they had answered the call without hesitation. In the cargo holds of human ships, refugee families slept safely under the protection of soldiers who had risked everything to save them. Children who would have been consumed by the Vrex played games with human crew members who spoke different languages but shared universal compassion. The message was clear to anyone watching: humanity had announced its presence on the galactic stage not through conquest or intimidation, but through an absolute commitment to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. And, across the galaxy, other Vrex swarms took note. 6 months after the Andorian victory, as historians had begun calling it, Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of the newly constructed Terran Alliance Strategic Command Station. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see the bustling activity of humanity's first major military installation outside the Sol system. The station orbited the fourth planet of Andoria, now serving as the primary refugee resettlement world. Below on the surface, human engineers worked alongside grateful civilians from a dozen different species to build new cities designed for multi-species habitation. What had begun as an emergency evacuation had evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history, a truly integrated interspecies society. Admiral, priority transmission incoming from Earth Command, announced Commander Harrison, who had been promoted to serve as her aide after their victory over the Vrex. Chen turned from the window, her expression serious. Over the past 6 months, reports had been flooding in from across the galaxy. Vrex swarm sightings were increasing, and several minor systems had gone completely silent. The threat they had faced at Andoria was spreading, and the galactic community was finally beginning to understand the scope of the danger. Put it through, Jake. The holographic projector activated, revealing the familiar face of Admiral James Morrison, head of Terran Alliance Military Command. His usually calm demeanor showed signs of strain, and Chen immediately knew the news wasn't good. Sarah, we've received formal requests for assistance from 16 different council member species. The Vrex are accelerating their expansion, and conventional fleet actions are proving completely ineffective against them. Chen nodded grimly. What's the current tactical situation? The crystalline hegemony lost an entire sector fleet 3 days ago. 200 ships, completely consumed within 4 hours. The Silicon Collective is evacuating their outer colonies after losing contact with 12 systems. Even the Aquatic Federation is requesting our help, despite their previous refusal to assist at Andoria. The irony wasn't lost on Chen. 6 months ago, those same species had declined to help save 12 billion lives. Now they were begging for human assistance as the Vrex threat reached their own territories. What are you authorizing? She asked. Full military deployment. We're activating every reserve unit, calling up retired personnel, and converting civilian shipyards to military production. The Senate has declared a state of galactic emergency. Chen felt a familiar weight settle on her shoulders. The victory at Andoria had proven that humans could defeat the Vrex, but it had also made them the galaxy's primary hope for survival. Every species was now looking to humanity for salvation, and the responsibility was overwhelming. Admiral, there's something else, Morrison continued. Dr. Vasquez's research team has made a breakthrough regarding Vrex origins. The data she gathered from the Andorian battle has revealed some disturbing information. Send me everything. I'll review it immediately. As Morrison signed off, Chen made her way to the station's primary research laboratory. Dr. Vasquez had been working non-stop since their victory, analyzing Vrex remains and coordinating with xenobiologists from across the galaxy. Her findings would determine humanity's strategy for the coming conflict. The laboratory was a hive of activity, with human researchers working alongside alien scientists to understand their common enemy. Holographic displays showed detailed analysis of Vrex biomechanical components, while massive computers ran simulations of their biological processes. "Elena, what did you find?" Chen asked as she approached the main workstation. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her analysis, her expression troubled. "Admiral, we've identified the Vrex's point of origin. They come from the galactic core, where an ancient civilization attempted to transcend biological limitations through mechanical augmentation." She activated a holographic display showing the galaxy's spiral structure. A pulsing red region near the center indicated the Vrex home territory, while spreading tendrils showed their expansion patterns over millennia. The original species was highly advanced, far beyond any current galactic civilization. But something went wrong with their enhancement process. Instead of achieving transcendence, they created a biological imperative to consume and convert all organic matter they encountered. Chen studied the display with growing horror. "How long have they been spreading?" "Conservative estimates suggest 50,000 years. Admiral, they've consumed hundreds of thousands of inhabited systems. Entire civilizations have been completely erased from existence. And, we're the first species to successfully resist them? The first to defeat them in direct combat, yes. But, that's not the most important discovery." Vasquez activated another display, this one showing detailed scans of Vrex neural tissue. "We've found evidence that the original consciousness still exists within their biomechanical forms. They're aware of what they become, and they're suffering." The implications were staggering. The Vrex weren't just monsters to be destroyed, they were victims of their own technology, trapped in biological forms that compelled them to commit genocide while retaining enough consciousness to understand the horror of their actions. "Is there any way to reverse the process?" Chen asked quietly. "Theoretically, yes. The electromagnetic pulse that disrupted their bioelectric network also caused temporary restoration of original neural patterns. But it would require massive intervention on a galactic scale, and there's no guarantee of success." Chen absorbed this information while considering the strategic implications. Humanity was now faced with a choice that would define their role in galactic civilization. They could continue to fight the Vrex as an enemy to be destroyed, or they could attempt the impossible, saving both the Vrex and their intended victims. "Elena, how many Vrex swarms are currently active?" Long-range sensors detect approximately 47 major swarm formations, each containing between 1 and 5 million ships. Total estimated population is over 100 million biomechanical entities. 100 million suffering beings, compelled to destroy everything they encountered while retaining enough consciousness to understand the horror of their existence. It was a tragedy on a scale that defied comprehension. "Admiral, there's someone here to see you," Harrison announced over the communication system. Chen looked up to see a figure approaching through the laboratory entrance. It was Admiral Zethkar, accompanied by representatives from a dozen different council species. Their expressions were grim but hopeful, and she realized they had come to make a formal request. "Admiral Chen," Zethkar began formally, "the Galactic Council has voted unanimously to request Terran Alliance leadership in coordinating the defense against the Vrex threat. We offer our full support, our technology, our fleets, and our resources under human command." Chen looked around the laboratory at the assembled representatives. These were beings whose species had refused to help at Andoria, but who now understood that humanity's commitment to protecting innocence extended beyond their own interests. "What exactly are you asking?" Chen replied carefully. "Complete strategic authority," announced the representative from the crystalline hegemony. "Unified command structure, resource allocation, and tactical decisions. The galaxy needs leaders who will fight impossible battles to save innocent lives. And if we refuse?" Zethkar's expression was somber. "Then, the galaxy dies, Admiral. Species by species, system by system, until nothing remains but the Vrex and empty space. Humanity is our only hope." Chen looked back at Dr. Vasquez's research displays, considering the magnitude of what they were being asked to undertake. Not just defending the galaxy against the Vrex, but potentially saving the Vrex themselves from their biological programming. "Give me 12 hours to consult with Earth Command," she decided. But I want something from the Council in return.
Complete disclosure of all military technology, open sharing of research data, and absolute commitment to whatever strategy we develop.
Even if it seems impossible, asked the Silicon Collective representative.
Especially if it seems impossible, Chen replied.
Humans specialize in accomplishing the impossible when innocent lives are at stake.
Over the following hours, Chen communicated extensively with Earth Command and the Alliance Senate. The decision they faced would determine not just humanity's role in galactic politics, but the very survival of organic life in their corner of the universe. In the end, the choice was simple.
12 billion people had been saved at Andoria because humans refused to accept that innocent lives were expendable.
Now the scale was larger, but the principle remained the same. Chen returned to the Council representatives with her decision.
The Terran Alliance accepts unified command authority for the Galactic Defense Initiative. But we're not just going to fight the Vrex. We're going to save them.
The aliens exchanged confused glances.
Save them? Sethkar asked. They're victims, Admiral.
Victims of their own technology who have been forced to commit atrocities for 50,000 years. If we can find a way to restore their original consciousness and break their biological programming, we could end this threat permanently while saving 100 million tortured beings.
The risk would be enormous, protested the hegemony representative. If the attempt failed, we could lose everything.
Chen smiled with the same cold determination that had carried them to victory at Andoria.
Then, we'll make sure it doesn't fail. That's what humans do when the alternative is unacceptable.
As news of humanity's assumption of galactic defense leadership spread throughout known space, something unprecedented began to happen. Species that had been enemies for millennia started working together under human coordination.
Ancient territorial disputes were set aside in favor of unified action against the Vrex threat.
But, perhaps most importantly, hope began to spread through systems that had resigned themselves to inevitable destruction. For the first time in galactic history, a species had looked at an impossible situation and chosen to fight not just for victory, but for redemption.
Admiral Chen returned to the observation deck, watching as ships from dozens of species arrived at the station.
Each vessel brought technology, personnel, and resources to the growing alliance. But, more than that, they brought faith in humanity's ability to achieve the impossible. The Vrex swarms continued their advance through the galaxy, unaware that their ancient suffering was about to end. They had encountered a species that refused to accept defeat, refused to abandon innocence, and refused to believe that redemption was impossible. The galaxy had called for help, and only the furious humans had answered. Now it remained to be seen whether human fury, tempered by compassion and guided by hope, could accomplish the greatest rescue mission in galactic history. The war for the galaxy's soul was about to begin.